recording and the AI, turn that on. So yeah, I just we've been starting to do our setting the vision. Intention is to build the empathy movement to make mutual empathy a core cultural value. And this group is the intention is to develop and document the holistic empathy definition model. If that sounds okay with you all. And then I thought we
Hmm.
could hear a couple of things. If you have anything to add, is to review the a project to-do list. So there's a link there for kind of an overall to-do, my to-do list. I want to review that. And then I also have this defining empathy emotions diagram that I wanted to show you, kind of get your feedback on too. So is there anything else you all would like to add as a
Um,
agenda?
where do
Um,
you have? Okay, right at the. Okay, all right, yeah.
I don't have anything to add to that. You are
Okay,
so organized.
trying to be.
Hmm.
Yeah, oh, did you see that in Notebook LM? I
Yeah, I did take the time to listen to that. That was, I love those
isn't that
podcasts that it can create. It's crazy. Yeah, that was a lot of fun to listen to that. And I think that it pretty accurately captured
uh-huh.
of what we've been talking about.
Yeah,
What is it that you're
so
talking about here?
let me bring it up if I can
Hmm.
find it. Notebook. So Google has this app, I guess, called Notebook LM. So, and this is it. And you create a project and you input. So I've input all of our recordings. And so it's like a little AI. It's analyzing all of these uh, discussions that we've had, the seven or so recordings, and it creates these reports. And, it's like, here's one. It creates you know,
A
Oh, look
map.
at
a
Wow.
this.
map of it that it creates these, I don't know, it creates these different reports about what we talked about.
Hmm.
And there's a whole bunch of me, and then it creates this conversation.
Hmm.
I'm just not gonna.
Wow.
It blows my mind. And then have you ever tried interacting with the conversation?
I have a
It's
little
so
bit,
crazy. You can ask it questions and it'll respond to
and
you.
they talk to you. Yeah, crazy. So let me see if so. What it does is it creates a conversation between a guy and a man and a woman. And it's sort of like a podcast style, and they talk about all the stuff uh, in the uh, in the analysis that it's
All
made.
right, welcome everyone
Do
to another deep dive. Today we're tackling empathy.
you hear
Buckle
that?
up.
This one's going to be a
Yeah.
wild ride.
It is, it really is. And we're doing it, thanks to a listener request. Someone out there wanted to know more about this big, kind of confusing world of empathy.
Yeah, and they specifically pointed us towards some really fascinating discussions happening on Edwin Empathy Rutch's YouTube channel.
Lots of good stuff with Jody Edwin and some really thought provoking conversations there.
Yeah. Anyway, I gotta stop it there. But I don't know if you're able to. I don't know if I gave the permission to share. But that's the link. I'm not sure if you have. Yeah, I can add you, Daniel. Daniel. So anyway, just playing a lot with different AI and see how we
Hmm.
can use that. So okay, so maybe we'll do the overall to-do list. See if you have any feedback on that. So uh, let's see. Let me find it.
To-do list. Okay.
To-do list.
All
Yeah,
right.
there's a link there. So this is just a to-do list I had, for myself, is to develop a project team group, to work on this project. So, this is kind of the core here. and developed a document for the holistic empathy definition model. And it's to create a slideshow. I'd like to create some articles. Like to create a training course, workshop on this, and eventually write a book too about the holistic definition model. And then ground the model in the empathy circle practice, just so that people can personally experience the aspect of empathy or the lack of empathy. And I think this will help spread the empathy circle practice, since our goal with the empathy center is to teach everyone in the world how to take part and facilitate an empathy circle. And the basic model is, basic empathy, which is, Carl Rogers' definition of empathy, which I'm calling basic empathy, self-empathy, imaginative empathy, and holistic empathy. And I'm really amazed, Jody, how we have such a similar understanding of the issues, of it. It's in real alignment. And then test the basic empathy model with empathy activists, experts, and academics. So, what do they think of the model? So, I'm actually next week meeting with Lou Augusta. He's written, multiple books on empathy. So, we're going to be talking about the definition. So, I'd like to take the basic definition and, run it and have, talk with other academics about it. And then empathy activists, so I'm setting up like interview dialogues, and Empathy Super Friends. This is a group of, folks, Maria, Robert, Elif, and Peter, etc. There's a whole bunch of them. There's like 100 of these people, to have the basic model, and then kind of check with them what their thoughts are on it, and also a way of kind of promoting it. And there's various issues to address, like moving from a limited individualistic perspective to a holistic perspective, moving from, I would say, the inaccurate reason versus feeling dichotomy. I think it's the cognitive affective model. I think kind of want to get away from that, more of an integrated model and abstract concept. So it's not, when people are talking about empathy, it gets very abstract, and it just gets lost, and really bring it into the empathy circle as a experience, so we can actually experience each of the aspects that we're talking about. And then map the holistic definition model, onto an empathy circle on other definitions. We did that a little bit with your list, Jody, right? You had a bunch of definitions. How does Carl Rogers' work fit in? Marshall Rosenberg, how does the, affective, cognitive, empathic concern model fit? There's Dan Batson's 8 Things Called Empathy. He's like did a lot of work on defining empathy. Dan Zahav, who's is a phenomenologist, and I thought he has a real good model of how he defined empathy.
I haven't seen that one. I'll have to look into this.
Yeah, he's really, let's see, the empathy. There's a video, I can send that to you. He's coming from the phenomenologist point of view, and he would only call what Rogers was calling empathy, sensing into someone's experience as empathy. And he wouldn't, like, imaginative empathy, he wouldn't consider that, a true empathy. And he also addresses kind of the issues with Paul Bloom's, criticisms, and kind of has a good explanation of, critique of that. There's also the blocks to empathy, like to map those on. And these is in the literature. There's all these blocks that, come out of some various books are out there on practitioner, who do actually do practitioner empathy, like Thomas Gordon, William Miller, NVC. They have these topics here that are like blocks to empathy. So I want to map those onto the model, and you can actually role play them, in the empathy circle. And
So blocks to empathy means roadblocks, like standing in the way of empathy?
yeah, it's like you can see it was advising. So in the empathy circle, you say, oh, I'm really having a hard time. I'm really struggling with, dealing with this and that issue. And instead of saying, oh, I hear you having, some real struggles, you say, oh, I think what you should do is this,
Mhm.
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
So
I got it.
that's like a block. The same thing with
Hmm.
with agreeing, right? And somebody says, "Oh,
Hmm.
so and so is a real jerk," instead of saying, "Oh, I'm hearing you say so and so is a jerk," and really sensing into what they're saying, you say, "Yeah, I agree with you. That person is a
Hmm.
jerk." So there's a whole bunch of these that can be actually role played. And then I want to kind of do other general definitions by high profile people like Obama. Like he talked a lot about empathy, and I want to map that onto. And I think what he's talking about is imaginative empathy, what he really focused on. And then definitions by lay people. I know, Jody, you'd asked a lot of sort of lay people what their definition of empathy is.
Mhm.
I'm
Um,
one.
and academic measurements, go through some of the tests, and say what the heck are they actually studying, and map
Which
that on.
sometimes it blows my mind
Mhm.
what they have in those questionnaires. But
Yeah, it has nothing to do with empathy, in my
yeah,
view.
it
It's
really
like
is so
it's just
surprising
like,
sometimes. Like emotional reactivity. Like I go to pieces in an emergency.
uh,
I don't understand why that's in an empathy scale.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, what a mess.
Yeah.
It's it's like no wonder it's like we're not getting anywhere with this empathy work because it's such a mess.
Hmm.
And then the criticisms, I like to go systematically through the criticisms, the against empathy, dark side of empathy, suicidal empathy, sin of empathy, comments that like Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson have. And there's somebody who actually just
Oh,
wrote a article about radical empathy. And the problem with radical empathy, and it's like it's a mess. It's an academic, and I emailed him and asked him to do an interview, and he was thinking about it. So,
Hmm.
um, and then others, the compassion community too. I find, they try to promote compassion over empathy, and they actually, I don't think they really understand empathy either. If you ask me, that's like the whole Dalai Lama crowd kind of around that. They
Yeah,
kind of
and
confuse
I
you.
really have to push back against that for very real reasons because if you have compassion without seeking to understand, then you end up helping people in a way that's not helpful.
Yeah, it's that whole
mhm.
sympathetic
Yeah.
kind of
I,
response where you're
I
actually just
really I
helping
really
yourself.
struggle with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'd mentioned too that you had worked in Africa, right? In
Mhm.
in with nonprofit, care kind of projects, and that's kind of what you see there is this kind of a sympathy, feeling sorry for people, and you don't
Mhm.
really listen to the people. So you have
Yeah, and
real experience.
if we're defining empathy as just an emotion contagion experience, like a reactive process, then maybe compassion is more appropriate. But with our definition of empathy, that's more holistic and it's more like an active process where you're trying to understand where somebody else is coming from and what their needs really are instead of just assuming, then I have a big problem with compassion being the answer to all of this.
Mhm.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah.
And not only that, they're like critical. They're like with Matthew Ricard is a big, person one of these scientist turned, Buddhist monk, and he and Paul Bloom had, dialogues, and he agrees, with Paul Bloom, so he very much confusing empathy with emotional contagion and stuff. So,
But
and
what's in their mind the difference between what they do and what empathy is, or what's the danger of empathy? That you feel into somebody that you shouldn't feel, or
yeah, they're seeing it as emotional contagion. So if it was in an empathy circle, that one person is like, oh, I'm all distressed. I'm, just falling apart. That you as the listener is like, oh, I'm falling apart. Instead of reflecting, sensing into what the speaker is saying, they're sort of taking on the
Mm,
emotion and almost becoming narcissistic, self-centered in their own emotion.
mhm,
Is how a lot of what their criticism is, and they're also saying, well, empathy doesn't solve problems, doesn't have an action component, and compassion does. Compassion means you want to do something to help them, but it's kind of like the help is a lot of that sympathetic help that Jody's mentioning, where it's really almost like a narcissistic, trying to address your own pain instead of really understand the real needs of the others and be in a holistic, empathic dialogue. And we have a good model for that too with empathic, uh, that empathy has a real action component. It is like human-centered design. It's the design community in Silicon Valley where it kind of came out of is all about, the first step in designing anything is you need to be able to empathize with the needs of the people you're designing for and try to really understand, and then also test, ideas. And there's also a model called co-design where you're together designing something with the people who, you're kind of working with. So yeah. So anyway, there's that's the kind of stuff that needs to be
but it's isn't
articulated and
there like
documented. Hmm.
there's like isn't there a component always sort of as a core component is that thing that people say what you do, how you listen, how you speak, what you emit in emotion, and so is causing something for me. And so what you do is making me like your empathic
Right.
way
Yeah.
makes
Uh-huh.
me be also empathic, and you are the cause for me feeling
Right.
this way.
You're the cause of my pain, right?
Right, right.
And
And
yeah, and I
that's,
think you addressed that because that's what you were seeing as some of these criticisms. I remember you talked about that recently. Yeah, that was really good.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, no,
uh-huh.
I just, I'm always, I want to, this is already kind of overwhelming me because this is like so much already. And I'm interested like I said, I'm the lay people person here. I'm the amateur. I'm interested in the topic. I don't know if I can be of help here,
Yeah,
but
this is like, Jody's been and I've been studying this in depth
yeah,
from all, the whole spectrum. So if you're just jumping into it, it can be confusing,
yeah.
definitely, because you don't have all the background, understanding. But
Well, I'm just saying there's a simplification in the
mhm,
conversation that I
yeah,
can use. I can say there's a group of people who will at any moment go to the place where they say, you're causing my
right.
emotions. And there's another group of people who say, no, that's not accurate. You cannot cause any emotions in somebody else, or somebody else cannot cause emotions in you. You're responding with your emotions to what somebody else is doing.
Yeah,
And that's like taking,
we can model that in the empathy circle. So in the empathy circle, it says, you're a real asshole, and then the listener says, "Oh, you're hurting my feelings. I'm so terrible." Versus, "Oh, I hear you saying that I'm an asshole."
yeah,
Right? You're empathizing with the criticisms or whatever
yes,
stuff the person is saying instead of taking it on personally and it becoming, all about you and how hurt you are. Because that's the whole victimization, stuff
Right,
that happens, right? It's like, I'm the victim, you caused all my stuff.
right,
And instead of being a victim, you can just be an empathizer. You just empathize
right.
with the criticisms or whatever, or whatever is sending you off. So yeah, I think that's a really
I
great
remember
point.
Marshall was radical on that when,
Hmm.
we had like 300 people in the room and people asked, so, these kinds of questions. He said, well, we have to settle on one thing first, and that's nobody can cause any emotions in you.
Hmm.
And that was half of the event was the discussion around that. Because people get really inflamed by a statement like that and say, no, that's not true. Of course, you making my own emotions and so on. And there's like I don't know, it's some developmental step that people take when they start taking responsibility for their own emotions. And
And empathy is a
I think
response to that.
there's a
Uh-huh.
lot of the criticism stuff about empathy has to do with other people doing this to me. So
And it's how do we
there's a line
document
for
that? Yeah, the thing is how do we, because
yeah.
that's perfect. I mean, when you said it, it really resonated with me the other day. That's, right on but how do we document it? How do we convey that? And is kind of the issue. And we can model it in the empathy circle, right? So people can actually role play it.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
in aspect of that? So how do you come to taking responsibility for your emotion? Is that something that the work with empathy strengthened in you,
I think
or
so.
even just brought online this awareness through that, or did you bring this into?
I think empathy, doing the empathy circle helps a lot. It's and also seeing that the response, it's very much the woke philosophy, right? Is, oh, there's all these victims out there, you're responsible for, everything. And so, I did an interview with Daryl Davis, who he's been written up in the New York Times and all that, where he actually went out to the Ku Klux, he's African American. He went to the Ku Klux Klan folks, talked to them, listened to them, befriended them, and they saw that how wrong they were just in terms of their judgments by him just listening to them and befriending them and helping them. And they gave up their Ku Klux Klan robes, and he has like 200 robes, right? And I did an interview with him, and we called it the interview was called "Empathizing with Racism." So it's like not being against racism. You want to empathize with racism. You want to empathize with judgment. You want to empathize with authoritarianism because the means are the end. And the empathy circle models that. So, somebody can be authoritarian in the, you should be doing this. I demand that you do this. And in the empathy circle, you say, well, I hear you really want me to do this. And you feel really strongly that you're empathizing, with them. So it's very subtle, and that's what I think. These criticisms you to go all over the place because the empathic experience is very subtle.
Mhm.
But the empathy circle models it, so we have a starting point. So anyway,
And I believe that one of the big criticisms that people come up with is when you say things like empathize with racism, they think that what you're saying is agree with
hmm,
racism. And
right,
that's actually at the heart of the research that I'm doing, is trying to parse out the difference between empathizing and agreeing. It's not the same thing. I feel very strongly about that. I don't
hmm,
have the empirical data to back it up yet, but that's actually what I'm trying to do. But it intuitively makes sense to me that
Hmm.
in order to empathize with somebody, most people think that you're saying you have to agree with them. But like Edwin was saying, that's one of the blocks to empathy. If you jump to agreeing with somebody, you're not actually empathizing with them. You're not validating where they're coming from and maintaining your own level of self empathy in the process.
yeah,
And so I think, yeah, that's one of those incredibly
it's
nuanced
subtle.
areas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very subtle. Uh-huh.
Well,
And
and
it's
I and
disagreeing too, agreeing or
yeah,
disagreeing. It's like
Mhm.
both.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And but that requires from the listener at least one step, which is when you talk about something that triggers my emotions, when you talk, or let's say about racism, and I have strong emotions around it, that I have a self-awareness to say I'm reacting to what
Mhm.
he's saying, and I'm going to stop myself from coming from my reaction and just still listen and reflect back what he's saying.
yeah.
Or in the better version, even, I don't have a reaction to racism because I'm not racist. I don't have any racism in me. I'm not on the doing side, nor on the ignoring side or anything. I'm just matured enough to know racism exists. I can listen to it and I can reflect it back. I don't even have to have a reaction. Because what you just touched on, Jody, is not just agreeing, but what I hear in circles like that is, what? You have no reaction to what he's saying? Are you not angry? Are you not like getting like super, like you should be really like up in arms for
Mhm.
what he's saying? And you say, no, I'm not. That's what he's saying. It has nothing to do with me. And that level of maturity is, that's
Most
part of
people don't get
the
there.
true empathic process, is it
Yeah.
not? Yeah.
So I've been learning recently. So I'm a PhD student right now, so I'm still taking classes, and I just took a developmental psychology class, and we were talking about the development of moral reasoning. And there's this higher level of moral reasoning where you're able to kind of do what we're talking about, where you don't get emotionally involved in it, but you can see that there are like transcendent values that are more important than rules and like this should be this way or this should be that way, and you're able to kind of rise above that. And one thing I found that was really interesting in this is that it's most people never actually get to that developmental
Yes.
stage of moral
Yes.
reasoning. And I mean, so I think that that's important for us to recognize when we're trying to teach people empathy, is that the natural state of it is that most people are going to expect, if you're not angry about the injustices, then you're not paying attention. I even saw some pictures of some protesters yesterday on social media. They were protesting the Elon Musk stuff that's happening, and one of the signs that they had said, if you're not angry, you're not paying attention.
Hmm.
And I think that really gets at what you're talking about, that we can rise above it. We can be active. We can be activists to try to do something that's positive, but anger isn't the answer. And one of the leaders of the church that I belong to just day before yesterday said, anger never persuades.
Yes.
And I think that's so profound, because if we are going to get into that state of anger, people's defenses go up, and all of a sudden the empathic process stops. We can't have that safe space where people feel like they can talk to each other if somebody is lashing out in anger. Because it's just a natural response that you're going to try and protect yourself when you see that somebody else is angry. And so, yeah, I just think that it's not helpful if we go
Hmm.
to that point.
Yeah.
Are either of you familiar with the work of, let's see, what's it called? Crucial Learning. It's a company that does crucial conversations. They wrote a book a few years ago, but they talk about uh, what you're talking about, where you view somebody else's actions as causing your emotions, and they have an extra step in there where it's, you have to interrupt that event where it's like, just direct causation, and you add in a component of a story. I'm telling myself a story, and that is what is leading to my emotions. And I think that's a really important thing as we're talking about this. If if you take the moment to have some self-awareness and some self-empathy, you recognize that there is a story that you're telling yourself, and you're interpreting what the other person is doing,
Hmm.
and that's
Hmm.
why you feel the emotions that you
Yes.
feel. It's
Hmm.
not directly because of them. what they did caused, maybe you can say cause, but it caused the story that you interpreted, and then that is what is causing your emotions. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think
And what
that
makes it,
breaking it down.
and
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
observed this in my group in Phoenix, like over and over and over again. It's quite upsetting. I haven't been able to unlock that. This is a social phenomenon that I just observe. Is that then when things happen, then the people meet to reflect about what happened, and they share those stories with each other, not
Mm,
what happened actually.
mm.
And so they share each other's interpretations of what happened and get to fight more and more and more because the interpretations have nothing to do with what actually took place. They are their interpretations, projections of the on the situation, backed with strong emotion,
Yeah.
and that is a
And then
mess.
that
It
becomes
it
the
it
reality.
creates a
Mhm.
mess every time, and you can even see it in our political sphere here, right on TV, in the talk shows of MSNBC. That triggering process happening all the time. People not really listening to each other, but being triggered, and then say, "You are doing this to me."
Mhm.
Yeah, I highly recommend that book because they talk
Mhm.
specifically about that. I've met the one of the authors, actually a couple of the authors of that book, and it is really it's eye-opening to see that there's more to it than just a cause and effect. And so
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely recommend that because it really overlaps a lot with what we're doing here. Let's
Oh,
see, I
thank you
actually pulled up a
for the
summary.
link. Yeah.
Yeah, I pulled up a summary, and just to give you an overview of what they talk about in the book, start with heart, so empathy and positive intent, stay in dialogue, make it safe, don't get hooked by emotion, agree a mutual purpose, separate fact from story, and agree a clear action plan. So they're specifically talking about like high stakes conversations when
Mhm.
there's some big disagreement involved.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think as we're developing our model of what holistic empathy is, that might be something we want to incorporate into it as well.
Yeah, and the in the empathy circle, what you're talking about, Daniel, if somebody says something and but I instead of reacting to it, if whatever, those feelings may be coming up. Like I feel like nervous, anxiety, but I stay with the person reflecting back what I'm hearing. So I'm maintaining the empathic sensing into the other person. But then when it becomes my turn to speak, I can respond with, oh, what you're saying is I really feel anxious and nervous, about that because we want to be open and honest and not just repress whatever feelings
Mhm.
we have. But then that feeling gets met with empathy. So the first response gets met with empathy, and then the next response. So each response, whatever each person says gets met with empathy, but you also have the free speech, sort of part of it, and that can get,
Right.
you can always develop your reactions and so forth, and get deeper. Like what this book seems to show is like, how do you have more kind of a balance, or how do you deal with these, issues that are maybe triggering or upsetting to you, or that
Right.
you want to be upset with. So again, I'm always trying to bring it back to the empathy circle because I see that as sort of our minimal viable
Yeah, yeah, I love
structure
that.
of how do we deal with these, and from there we can kind of grow, the experience, the model, and deepen it. So.
I like
Yeah.
that a lot. And it makes me become aware how elegantly empathy circles almost like bypass this whole possibility for somebody to get emotionally engaged into what another person is saying, simply by the setup of it. Now, what it also makes me think of is that probably people who want to blame and want to be victims, they're probably not going to come to empathy circles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you
Yeah.
So,
have to be
and
open to it in the
we
first place.
probably won't be able to ever convince them to come. In other words, I have certain people when they come to my breath work, they notice that I do breath work a little bit different, more free, and they have an idea because of their yoga they did. And and then I can tell them, they come in the class, they say, no, I'm not breathing like that. And then I have actually told some of them, then maybe this is not a class for you, because then they stay in the whole class, they stay reserved and hold back and never show up again. I know this already.
Hmm.
So I'm just saying this because that is a level of maturity that we all have shared in all these trainings that I went to in Santa Barbara and in all the circles I do now. There is that level of maturity, sort of a foundational thing. What you've been talking about, Jody, that there is, we assuming in the way we do empathy circles, we assume that that maturity is present.
Well, it helps build it too, by sort of
It helps build
practicing
it to
it, it
make it
helps
deeper and
build
makes
it.
it,
Yeah.
yes,
And
yeah.
and so there may be people that have that, that it's going to be a spectrum, and I think we can bring people along.
And I
But
think it's tricky sometimes also because when people hear empathy circle, certain people like the Elon Musks of the world, the Paul Blooms of the world, don't want to engage in that because of the word that we're using that
hmm
has a negative connotation for them. And so they see it as something that it's not, because our version within the empathy circle as well is just it's something completely different from what they're talking about. um,
Yeah.
and and also in the research that I've been doing, there's some suggestion that people hesitate to empathize because they know that there's going to be a cognitive and emotional load attached to it. And so even if they know it's a good thing, I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we were editing.
Daryl, whatever, Daryl,
Yeah, Daryl
yeah,
Cameron, some of his
Cameron's.
research. Because you know that it's going to be emotionally and cognitively taxing for you, you turn away. And so we have to recognize that
All
there
the time.
is there is a certain level of readiness that is necessary before people are even willing to engage in an empathy circle. So I do still see it as like the minimum viable structure, but we also have to recognize that there is a barrier prior to that. And that is people's definitions and it's people's willingness to engage in the first place. And so, do you have any ideas, Edwin, of how to help people um, be more willing to enter into it when they see it as, oh, empathy,
hmm
I'm not ready for that, or I don't want that?
I think it's our definition project,
I
creating the
know, and it's
training material that clearly defines, what we're talking about. I
Right.
think it is a big part. So that's sort of at an
That helps them to
intellectual,
come in.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
and
and
training material that, or a podcast or something that kind of explains, and they say, "Oh, I see what you're talking about," So that's one part. And there was another part, but I forgot it.
well, I think we need
Uh-huh.
to meet people where they are and recognize
Mm-hmm.
that there is going to be that inhibition, there is going to be a hesitation, and maybe focusing on the benefits, like the relational benefits. Like you have these problems, like with the Crucial
I agree.
Conversations book, they start with the with the understanding that everybody has these high stakes conversations. We all have arguments and we don't like arguments. And so this is going to help you to make it through those arguments more effectively and maintain your relationships. And so if we attach it to the actual outcome that they see is going to be something that will make them feel better, then they're more willing to engage in it. But
Yeah.
Right.
if we focus on like broadly, humankind will be better or the other person will be better, people don't care,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
Appeal to
Yeah.
their personal experience. That's where you're saying meet people where they are. That's the other part, is just listening, empathically listening to them without being in
Right.
an empathy circle. Like when we
Mm-hmm.
do the empathy tent, we just set up chairs and we say, come and we're just going to listen to you.
Hmm.
So we don't
Right.
say immediately, you're going to go into an empathy circle. So but you're learning and practicing the skills in an empathy circle, and then you're meeting people wherever they are. It's like whatever's on your mind, let me just talk, here. And that's what I was thinking. We'd go to the Republican and Democratic conventions, or their events. And we just set up the empathy tent and say, hey, we're here to listen. Come and sit down and we'll just listen to you. So we're doing the first step in the
Mm,
empathy circle, and everybody loves to be heard
yeah,
and talk. So that's sort of
that's
the
the hook.
experience. Yeah, that's the hook. That's the experience
Yeah,
of
Right.
it.
because they want to be validated.
Hmm.
They don't necessarily want to validate the other side,
Yeah.
but
Right.
they want somebody to validate them.
Yeah, yes, yes. Everybody wants that. That brings up a question for me is like where um I don't know how to ask it right. Is this project for the purpose of converting more people, or is it um to bring more people to us that are already ready?
As I mentioned, it's to build. It's an empathy movement to make mutual empathy a core cultural
So
value.
what I'm
That's kind of what
right,
my
right.
thing is.
No, I mean, for me, this is a distinction that's kind of important because I've experienced in a lot of organizations, they are on the mission, and now everything becomes about recruiting more people, and especially the ones who are on the other side of us that have a problem with us or something. We got to learn to talk to them and so on. And of course, yeah, that's important. What I rarely hear is how do we build a stronger culture amongst us and amongst those who are ready to jump in, and then make our culture so attractive that for those who it's more difficult, we get them that way. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
like because one mindset is always thinking about trying to convince those who are not convertible or are difficult, and the other mindset would say, how do we make this more attractive?
Yeah, you
One
have
is
a
sort of
culture that's
promoting,
yeah. People
one
just
is
want to join.
promoting,
Uh-huh.
yeah, the one is promoting, the other one is attracting, is building a magnet, so to speak.
Modeling it. Yeah,
Mhm.
good
Yeah. I
point.
mean, do they look at us and say, wow, they look happier? Or
Yes,
Yeah, that's
there's
it.
exactly.
there's
Yeah.
something about our lives that is attractive to them. Um,
Right,
I want
right.
that. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's my model. I think we got to go there because, for so many, many reasons. Right now, we live in a moment where disruption and chaos is the doctrine. And I don't want to convince it that it's wrong. I want to, I want to build a shining city so everybody
Hmm.
comes over here, you know.
Yeah, that's what we need. We need to build that alternative empathic culture
Mhm.
that people are saying, yeah, I want to be part of that. It's a lot of fun. And we have that. People come into the circle and they're
Yes,
sort of joining the
yes,
circle and say, hey, this is really nice. I just feel really good here being everybody's so friendly and I feel heard. So what do you
yeah.
think
It's
about the
interesting.
overall the plan, the stove? I want to just that was sort of the outline that I just put down,
Yeah.
kind of for myself that I wanted to kind of work on. I just wondered what you thought of the outline or kind of where you are, especially Jody with
Yeah, I really like it. It's incredibly wonderfully ambitious, and that's how I like to live my life as well. How do you see like different people being involved in the different steps of that? Like, I know you want to write a book. Do you see that being something that we do collaboratively? What do you see that looking like? And like a podcast and the trainings, and what
yeah.
do you see our role being in that?
That's what I'm kind of looking at, like how that could work. I would say a training course, would be a good starting point. Maybe like how do we teach people? I'm working on the presentations, which is a bit like the course, a bit of a and maybe a course. So I'm kind of open for ideas, how to kind of move forward
Yeah, and
with.
then I would have to wonder because before I started my PhD program, I was starting up a business where I was going to start consulting in businesses and different organizations, and so I gave several talks on empathy with the hope that in the future, and like this is still part of my plan, is to go into organizations and train them on how to interact more effectively with each other and with their customers and their different stakeholders. And so, like you're talking about with human-centered design, like all of that comes into play when you're going and talking to organizations. So, in terms of the best way to move it forward, when you're talking about a training program, are you thinking of something that's like available for free online, or would it be we hold training sessions like you've been doing with the empathy circle facilitator trainings? Like, what do you have in mind for that?
I was thinking something specifically on the definition, like a course on the definition of empathy.
Oh,
So all the
okay.
stuff we've been talking about, it would be a didactic, component, like a bit of a more of a like a lecture component, but then maybe doing an empathy circle, maybe doing role plays where you can role play like all those blocks that we actually do empathy circles, and you experience the different blocks to empathy. You can experience, yeah, all the different criticisms and what they're kind of saying. How can you experience that? Because if you have it's I can say something and you can agree with me, and well, what does that feel like? Versus you just reflecting back and empathizing with what I'm saying. So each of those things you can viscerally have a role play. So it'd be a combination of right now a didactic, a bit of a lecture, and
And then
then
interactive.
interactive experiencing. But I'm kind of, it's kind of open.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on, who wants to be involved and how much. And I think that, getting something into companies would be great. I think now with the DEI is sort of collapsed. I mean, they had billions, I think, of dollars were going into that, and that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of collapsed. So I think there's space for something new in business,
Yeah, I think
that's
you're right.
empathic based, which is bringing all the sides together. People don't feel shunned or that they're guilty or all that kind of stuff. So I think there's, and that's where the money is definitely. I remember,
Yeah. So that's an important thing that I wanted to bring up is I'm not in this for money, obviously. I've done a lot of nonprofit work. I've I've donated, I mean, at this point, more than half of my life, like not even exaggerating, has been donated, like without actually probably even way more than that, because I've also donated my time as a stay-at-home parent as well. So I'm definitely not in it for the money, but I also recognize from my extensive experience with nonprofit work that when people are not expected to pay anything, they don't have any skin in the game. And there's this weird concept of worth needing to cost something, right? And so if it's worth a lot to you, you should be willing to pay money for it. And so I think this is an important thing to talk about because you're a nonprofit, and going into companies and talking, and training and doing all this, we need people to pay. Otherwise, they don't see it as something valuable. And the more they have to pay, the more they value it. And the more they see other people paying, the more they're going to value it in the future, right? And so it's just like the snowball effect. Whereas if it's free, it must not be that good or it must not be that impactful. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the best pay I ever got for this empathy work was through the Huffington Post. She started the like a training, for corporations, and they were getting area experts, to do some kind of workshops, and they were paying $500 an hour, for that, and that was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was, and so I'm all, for corporations and so forth. So getting paid is important, and then also I think for the movement to build, it has to be self-sustaining. People
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to make it, and I've been really bad at that. I've donated, a lot of my time, 80%, it seems like, and, it's not sustainable for the average person, especially if you want young people who are enthusiastic about the work. We have to have a model that they can have make an income. So I'm looking, at that, even though our facilitator
I have
training is
I have
free.
a couple of ideas
Mhm.
to that. One is um, that so number one, what I hear in this community of people that I'm now connected to, and we've been connected to for, I don't know, more than a year now. There's a component that drives us that is not monetary, but it's very powerful. And that's different from most other organizations I've been associated with. And that's a real deep hope that this will make a difference. And it's very trackable. It's very powerful, even in people who just came in. I mean, like Carla, an old friend of ours, discovered empathy circles like, I don't know, a couple months ago or so. And just to listen to her, what she feels like, how strong this is quite amazing. If that's true for her, doesn't mean that's true for everybody, but I hear it from her and then from so many others. So that's a driver that I don't want to ignore because it really is powerful, and it's a little bit trans money. In other words, it's more powerful than even the financial aspects in our life. But having said that, I can imagine that this facilitator training, just like we're doing it, that it continues like this on a donation basis because it's the best way to get people into the fold and get more and more people to participate in here. Then through that, we can find the people who want to do more. And if we would have then training and modules and different things for them to either say, I want to become a trainer that goes into corporations and sells that training, and I'm willing to pay for that. And then build the next level, sort of, people choose themselves into the tiers of engagement in this movement. And the first tier is kind of donation basis and free. So that's for the nonprofit part of us. And then the other tiers can have increasingly monetary values attached to
Yeah,
them.
that's what I've been thinking too. Yeah, we
Yeah.
always have a free or by donation empathy, training to start with. And like the definition course would be like the next level, paid course, probably, starting with some free prototyping, testing it
And the
but then
donations,
charging for it.
the donations also, there is something to it. Zach did a thing that made initially everybody cringe a little bit. Because the first day we collected in the training a certain X amount of money, and Zach counted it in front of everybody next morning. So this is what we pulled in. Can we have this at least double by tonight? Okay, everybody.
That is,
And we didn't normally ask for money like this straight up, but Zach did it, and it more than doubled by the night. So it's good
Ask.
to learn also how to ask for donations better and increase our donation load too. Yeah, I think.
Was that in Phoenix?
Yeah, that was in Phoenix.
Okay.
I think we took in the most money from a training ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't know, how does that resonate with you, Jody, with in terms of finances, charging?
yeah, I mean, it resonates from the perspective of self-sustainability of the organization, and also from the perspective of perceived value. And it's such a tricky balance because you want everybody to be able to learn from it and appreciate it, right? So you want to have it be free for those who can't afford to pay more for it. But then you also want to increase the perceived value because it is one of the most valuable things that we have in society. It's much more valuable than the Louis Vuitton bag that my mom just got, right? Much
Yes.
more valuable. But it was $3,000 that she paid for that, right? And that is a completely worthless thing, but people are willing to pay money for things that they value. And so it's just, I don't have the answer to this. This is something that I have tossed back and forth for decades. I don't know how to answer this question. But it is such an important thing for us to consider is how do you get the message out there to everybody and help them to value the message that you're putting out there at the same time. So I don't know if maybe that's something we just want to mull over for the next week and maybe
Yeah.
consider discussing it next week as well. If could I share my screen?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to show you, let's see, crucial learning.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay. So this is the company. It is a for-profit company that created Crucial Conversations, that book. And they have a series of courses that they provide for individuals. You can sign up and take any one of these classes. And I think it's $100 or something like that to take the class. And then they have corporate trainers as well who they're independent contractors, and they come and they receive all of the training, and then they go out into different companies who pay them directly, and it's something like $3,000, $5,000, something within that range, to come and do a training in their company. And the fact that they have it as a paid thing, at least from the company's perspective, they value it much more than what I have offered in the past, which has been free. So I mean, I've tried to take the same approach where I've said, hey, I can come in and do this training for your company. It's really great content. And the fact that I was offering it for free, nobody took it, even though I knew that my content was amazing. The fact that Crucial Learning has their content that is very expensive, and it's, for all intents and purposes, we're talking about the same thing, but theirs is an expensive product, and so people value it a lot more. And so that's just something that we need to consider moving forward. If we want to create a movement, we need to help people to see the value in their own lives and in their organizations. And sometimes that means money. Sometimes it means just the correct way, whatever the marketing approach would be. We have to connect it with their own needs. So that's just one example. I've seen a lot of different companies like this. If I don't go into academia, I may actually work for this company because they're based here pretty close to BYU. So that's just something I want us to really consider as we're looking into putting out information. A book is a great way to it's a low cost product that you can get to a lot of people. And then that's like, are you familiar with there are a lot of coaching programs. I'm a member of 2 different coaching programs where they're like training people to become public speakers and like online influencers and stuff like that. And this is something they talk a lot about, where it's like different tiers where you hook people with the free stuff, and then you get them into the low ticket items, and then you progress them onto the higher ticket items. So that might be a model that we want to follow, where we can still continue to provide a lot of free content. But then as people recognize the value, then they want more, and then you get them into the higher ticket items.
Yeah, I've been
That's
seeing
something
that on YouTube that they have free, but now there's like members only content, that's becoming a thing, and then you have to pay for that. So
I mean, because in the end, we all need money to survive.
Yeah.
So we can't just continue to give this everything away for free for forever.
Yeah, that's actually, we have an empathy circle on that topic with when is it? It's actually the 19th. It's the financial circle at 2:00. So it's how do we kind of.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you're welcome to attend.
That's not this Saturday, but next Saturday,
next
right?
Saturday at 2:00 in this Zoom room. It's and we did one, and the topic was let me see. Yeah, I have I think the recording of the last one. Let's see if I can bring that up. And it's with Ingrid. She's been leading that. She's our treasurer, so that's Daniel's wife. Partner.
I'm sure she has a lot of thoughts on this topic. Okay, so that's at 2 p.m. in your Zoom link, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's that was the last one. I just ran it through the AI.
Okay, yeah, I'll see if I can attend that one. Oh, I just put it in on the 18th, not the 19th.
So, I mean, I've been really bad at this, for the addressing this. So, yeah, I'm just in terms of finances, if I didn't have Social Security, I'd be in trouble, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, my first job out of college was for a nonprofit, and I could not have worked there full time if I didn't get paid.
Hmm.
And that so they part of the donation income for the nonprofit needs to go toward sustaining the organization as well. Like, and I mean, I'm getting into stuff that I don't know anything about with how your organization is run, and so I apologize if this is coming off as like brash at all, because that's not my
No, this is
intent.
we're dealing with those issues.
Um, and when things got tight monetarily, like during 2008, the financial crisis, we had to cut a couple of employees and just cut back so that we could continue to run the programs, because people don't want to give money to employees, right? They want to give the money to the programs. But people who know how a nonprofit should work and how to maintain sustainability know that you have to have employees in order to grow an organization and to grow a movement. And so if this organization is going to be able to grow, and Edwin, let's all hope that you're around forever, but you won't be, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And so to pass it off to the next generation of people who
Yeah.
continue the
Mhm.
movement, there's going to have to be some income to help support it.
Yeah. We're
And
definitely
But we're
trying to
all
work
we're
on that.
all
Uh-huh. Yeah.
we're
But,
all we're not in opposition to that. It's just
yeah,
yeah.
hard to figure out. It's
it
hard to
is it
figure
is
out.
so tricky.
All my life I've been doing work. I mean, I just taught a workshop on Saturday about drum and rhythm knowledge. That took me 4 decades to come up with the content of that workshop, and a continuous practice myself, teaching and everything. There's some jewels in there that took forever to come up with,
Hmm.
but I share them in a matter of half an hour. Like, I mean, how can I put a value to that? It's
Hmm.
almost impossible.
I mean, each person
It's
who comes to that would have to pay $100,000 each.
right. So I settled on, like normally a 3 hour a class, private class out of my house, right? If I look in San Francisco, they run it like, I don't know, $45 or something like that, maybe 50, 60. So I ask for 80. I could easily ask, even in that framework, for 120, but nobody will show up,
Mhm.
even for that. And it could be much more expensive than that because it's life-changing. It's absolutely life-changing what you learn. So I think there's a lot of financial systems, or the financial system is not really reflective for value shared. It's random and it's annoying. It's part of the cognitive dissonance that we have to deal with. That people get paid outrageous amounts of money for jobs that seem to be so important, and I can't see why they're so important. And then teachers who do really the most important thing
Yeah.
get, I mean, so how does that make sense? And so
Or
now in the
stay-at-home
middle of
parents.
all of that, we have to figure out how to charge for making the world better. I mean, that's freaking hard.
And nobody's going to want to pay for that.
Yes.
Because that should be free. It should be provided for free. But then they don't implement it because they haven't paid for it. They haven't invested in anything in it. So it's such a
Yeah,
tricky
get it.
balance. I think
You
it's
can,
a
mhm.
largely a matter of marketing. It might be valuable to bring on like just a powerful marketer onto the board. Do you have anybody
Hmm.
who's in
No,
marketing?
would be good to have, yeah.
That was my thought for there is money in the organization. I think the best way to spend it is to, um, you know, polish our image and make the magnet stronger. And that's best done by people who know how to do this, because it's hard. It's not
Mhm.
simple.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
other part too is having donors that people put a lot of money into the whole DEI vision, and people got excited about it. But the same thing for an empathy movement that people can donate, put in resources and to help move it forward. So I see that as another, route that we need to get. There's sort of this polarization. Everybody's in one camp or the other. And I think what we're doing is a different approach. It's like, well, we need mutual empathy, between all sides, and otherwise we just keep going back, swinging back and forth with the polarization. And there's people, I think that we can, convince, or they would value that, see the importance of it, and especially if we model it. So, and we've gotten tons. I don't know if did I ever send you the media kit from all the empathy tent work? Have you ever seen that?
I don't know that I've seen that.
Oh, let me put it in the chat here, just so you can see. We've been on all kinds of. Let's see, is that going in there? Download. There it is. Yeah, if you download that, you can see those are just some of the media, that we got with the empathy tent. So, being out in public really gets a lot of publicity, kind of.
And it's a great portable, relatively inexpensive way to make a big impact, because you go to those highly populated areas. There's a lot of people who are going to see your empathy tent, and it speaks really loudly.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And if you download that, you can see, it's like LA Times, Sacramento Bee, TV stations in the Bay Area, even Fox and Friends mentioned it, but in negative terms. Breitbart, yeah, they totally, yeah, I can tell you the story sometime but
Breitbart.
But they did a fair, Breitbart was actually pretty fair in the comments were pretty nasty. There was like 400, like, oh, you libtards, you all this kind of stuff. And I said, oh, great, I hear you're interested. Would you like to hold an empathy circle to talk about it? And suddenly everybody left. They couldn't trigger me. So, and I was really wanted to have an empathy circle with them to talk about their criticism. I said, oh, there can be three of you and just me, just three against one. I don't care, glad to have the dialogue. And suddenly they said, oh, he's not getting triggered. I guess we'll just go do something else.
Yeah, because you've reached that higher level of moral reasoning that they haven't reached yet. They want you to be angry.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they want you to be angry. Exactly. Yeah.
That I think that is beautiful right there.
Yes.
That you were still willing to engage even when they were trying to provoke you.
Yeah, it even happened. It happened the second time. There was that guy, he was a real right-wing sort of spokesperson, back in the first Trump era. And we had the empathy tent set up at Sproul Plaza at UC Berkeley. And the next day they were going to come, but I guess they had somebody and they were kind of checking things out, and they saw the empathy tent and they took a photograph of it. And then he commented on it and said, haha, empathy tent, kind of ridiculing it. And it was the same thing. I mean, there was hundreds of, he had like 1 million, followers on Facebook or something. And it was the same thing. They were like, oh, this, libtards, all the criticism. And again, I just said, let's have a dialogue, let's, talk. And I'm open. We'll have a Zoom conversation. And suddenly they all just disappeared. So if you get criticisms, it's one of the best things to say, well, let's have an empathy circle, about it. So.
Yeah, I want to listen
That's
to
awesome.
you. Yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting.
Awesome.
And I think that goes back to what we were saying earlier. If we can't get people into the empathy circle, then the power of the empathy circle is limited, right? Like if we can't get them to be open to the idea of it, then we have to take a different approach. And this is definitely a marketing question. We have to tap into what are the deep psychological needs that they have that are not being met, and how what we have actually meets those needs.
Yeah.
Because they see it as the antithesis. They see it as threatening. Being open to it is something that's going to threaten their identity. It's going to threaten maybe their belief system. And so, again, this is going to come back to definitions of empathy, and it's going to come back to why people are hesitant to empathize. Yeah, and so getting into the marketing side of it, I think, is going to be really, really helpful with this.
And I think that having a clear definitions and being able to explain clearly what we're talking about, and differentiating
Mhm.
the criticisms. Now, there's valid points, there's valid points to the phenomenon people are talking about, but it's not empathy. And how do we, in a clear way, show, well, that's not what we're calling empathy. And again, I think the empathy circle can model it. I was also wanting to do, I can show this just so you start thinking about it just over the next weeks or so, is how to model something to show how feelings work, because the whole affective empathy issue being feelings, empathy and is a real sticking point. It's very confusing, and Zahavi, who I mentioned, he talks about this too in his talk, and I will send you that link. Is if somebody comes up, say, in an empathy circle and has depression, they say, "Oh, I'm really depressed." You sense it, you feel a little bit of it, within this empathic space, and then you reflect back your understanding. Oh, I hear you're feeling depressed. I'm looking for a way of modeling this versus, emotional contagion, where the person is
Mhm.
depressed and you feel the depression takes you over. So it's like called, emotional contagion, state matching, or identification or reaction,
Yes.
or
Did you
so.
create this? Because this is
Yeah.
great. Okay,
This
this is
so
awesome.
this is what I'm trying to find out. I'd like to create like a program where we can like model this,
Mm,
and
this is great. Yeah.
and then and then the other is well, that's not really emotional. You could say that that's two different people experiencing. That's more like state matching or identification or a reaction. Whereas emotional contagion would be the person has depression, and that depression, feeling of depression, moves over into the space of the other person. So they're both in a depressed state
Mhm.
versus an empathic state. And so in empathy, the listener feels into the speaker's experience, reflects back their understanding. You are feeling depressed. The speaker continues sharing, and the listener stays present, reflects back their understanding. And so to be able to model that, how there's a flow, and I'd like to maybe even do like a
Hmm.
cartoon, how they have these animations where they have somehow be able to animate this, and they get a lot of views, those animations. And and then there's the other part I wanted, and I'm just looking, how do we model this? And the other is that the person is depressed, you empathize, and you feel a little bit through mirror neurons. You're feeling a little bit, but it's not taking up your whole consciousness. And you're also creating like a map, an understanding of the other person. We create a map about the other person. Why do they feel joy? How intense is it? Etc. And so is that mental which is, yeah, mental model. So I'm just thinking, how do we, in a engaging, easy to convey way, sort of model these experiences.
Yeah, this is super helpful. I love those visuals because I mean, in answer to Daniel's question near the beginning of this conversation, like
Hmm.
what is the difference between those different types of empathy? And I think that makes it so clear and simple that it actually can be a very bad thing if you
Hmm.
are just engaging in emotion contagion, because all of a sudden everybody's depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts or homicidal thoughts that becomes yours, and that is very dangerous,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's so that's I think that's so important to really dig into more, and I really don't see the psychological research digging into that.
There's no
um,
models. I have never seen any clear sort of models going in this direction, so we
mhm.
can clearly, yeah, display it.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's really beautiful.
And think about it, like,
I
how can
think, I
we
mean,
build
I
on that?
personally will go as far as saying you cannot get contagious. and a contagion by somebody else. It's not
Mhm.
like a virus. That's not true. You're responding with your own trauma.
I
You're
agree.
adding your trauma to the situation.
Hmm.
It's because otherwise there would always be a possibility, no matter how far you develop yourself, that somebody else come around and just dump an emotion on you and you have to deal with it forever. No,
Well, there is the aspect of mirror neurons, which makes sense to me. So if you're feeling joy, that through mirror neurons, my neurons fire, my joy neuro my so I am sensing your feeling kind of within myself because I'm mirroring it. It's just not
but
having
these
that
are
take.
two different things.
Uh-huh.
I'm talking about something totally different because like the whole story about around the empath as you know I see in the younger crowd a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this situation. I got to lock myself in my home
Right,
because I'm
right.
an empath.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go out there, I pick up all these emotions from these people and it pollutes my inner space.
Yeah,
And that is BS.
yeah.
That is, you feel things. Yes, you vibrate with you have the mirror neurons. But that's a living thing. That's not that is there for a moment and then it's gone. It's like in your little imagery, it's the ability, like you put it in the little circle, to resonate with somebody else. But when you then add your own story to it, what you did caused by me, that I am now an angry
Mm-hmm.
person because your anger got into me because I'm an empath. That's not what you're describing when you say you have mirror neurons. You're resonating with another person, but that's a moment-to-moment thing. It's a living thing. It's not something that stays there for days or for hours after you met that person.
Right. And even your mirror
Stays there
neurons,
is your emotion that was activated.
yeah, and your mirror neurons are in your brain, and they are a
And your
part of the interconnected network of what makes you you, and everything, all of the stories that you've told yourself through your whole life. And
yeah.
so even though there is resonance there, like you can see it on fMRI, and actually Garrett Carden, who
Hmm.
was with us last 2 weeks ago, he's actually doing a study in 2 weeks where they're going to have storytellers on stage, autistic storytellers, and they're going to have people in the audience and they're going to have fMRI scanners happening. So during the storytelling to see
Wow.
what when the resonance happens during the stories. So I'm excited about that. So I do know that like the research has shown that that is a real thing, but it does
Hmm.
not necessarily mean that it is exactly the same. Like it doesn't mean the same thing to you. Like even if you have a similar emotion to them and you can feel it and you're kind of vicariously living it with them, like you're saying, Daniel, it's not going to continue to be the same forever, and it's not going to be incorporated into your story as it is incorporated into their story, because it's infinite. Like the number of connections between the different experiences that you've had in your life overlap with theirs for a moment, right? But then their orbit continues on, and it's going to mean something different to them than it does to you. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
I've actually said in the past that this version of empathy that we're talking about, where it's like actual neural resonance, I don't believe it exists. And people have been like really taken aback when I've said that. I don't think that empathy in that form is real, because it's always going to be filtered through the lens that you bring with you.
Yes.
Right. And so we can get closer to creating that map in our minds of what the other person's experience is. But it's always categorically across the board, every single time, going to be different from what they actually experienced.
Yes.
And
It can be
I
in the
think we just have to
ballpark,
recognize,
though, don't you think? It can
yeah, and
be.
it's still
Uh-huh.
something we should work toward,
Yeah.
because it's still going to improve our relationships. It's still going to make
Oh
society a
yeah.
better place, but it's not ever going to be 100% what they experienced and the way they experienced it.
And it's never going to be that something from me is transferred over to you,
Mm-hmm.
and now you polluted by that. How would that work?
Right.
I
I
have
mean,
something, I have a trauma in me, and now I traumatize you because of my trauma.
I mean, I
And it's
could
going to
That's
see
be
a
people
different.
taking
three-year-old.
it on.
That's my
Yeah.
that's my 5-year-old who says, "You make me feel bad." Yeah, as a 5-year-old, I get that. But
Yeah, because with the empaths are saying they want to block themselves off, right? Imagine a wall around yourself to
right.
block the energy. And I think that's sort of a defensive mode, and maybe you got to go take a walk and relax or
Yeah,
something. But the other is to reflect back what you're hearing, like, oh, this person is
yeah,
this. And again, that
exactly.
reflecting back, it's like for me is it's the self-other distinction, and it's them that's doing this. So I hear, oh, they're really upset, even if
Yeah.
I say it silently. And that's the thing that kind of grounds me. It's like, hey, it's not all my turmoil. It's like, oh, I hear that they're really upset and they're, or whatever, or they're very happy and excited. So I think it's that, just like in the empathy circle, that reflection kind of helps with the self-other distinction, and is sort of a
Yeah, I
grounding,
love that.
uh,
I mean,
yeah,
there's this
state.
work from Malcolm Gladwell. He did all these books, Blink, and his latest project, I forgot the title of the book. He wanted to assess if people are able to really know what's going on in another person.
Hmm.
And he did it in his typical way, very scientifically, very fast study, like tons of studies and everything. And essentially, what he came to is like, we suck at it really bad. We have no idea what's in general, we have no idea what's actually happening in another person. What we project is happening is, for the most part, I mean, above 90% of the time, we're wrong in this research. And that goes along with what Marshall always used to say, don't assume anything. Why don't you ask? Why don't you go
Hmm.
and ask the person what's happening for you? And that's the premise of the empathy circle to begin with. You speak freely about what's happening for you, and so I have access to you because you give it. I don't fantasize in that way. And the reflection back listening, I think, there's something to be talked about. Edwin, I feel like lately I've been like, I don't know, something like the distinctions of reflecting back, I think, are going to become more sophisticated.
You
That
get better at it, you mean, through
yeah, you get
experience?
better at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get better at it, and there's another depth to it
Hmm.
and and also sometimes a little bit. No, it's not part of our discussion here
No,
today. It's not
yeah,
that.
it's how do we go deeper in the empathy in the empathy circle? And, I've kind of focused on the first step a lot. There is a lot with, sharing your own feelings and needs, being more open, and how do you reflect back people's feelings and their needs. So there's a lot of more depth that can be done. I did put Dan Zahavi video in there,
Thank you.
Jody,
I just
for
pulled that up. Um,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
I have to
I
hop
think
off in
I've
a minute,
seen
but
this
I just
one.
wanted to share
Yeah.
my experience really quick of like my journey from being a person who saw myself as an empath, like at first in a positive way, but then I started to see it in a negative way. And I've always valued empathy. And I mean, even I look back at my CV from when I was just getting out of high school, and I put on there that that was one of my skills was empathy.
mm, okay.
And so I definitely have always valued it. And I know, Edwin, I've told you about this, but I don't think Daniel's heard this, but like, this is probably 3 years ago, my husband's best friend killed his family, and then himself. And so
Oh,
this was a very intense opportunity for me to experience a lot of empathy. And I was like ready for it. And I was like, okay, I value empathy. And so I'm going to go and empathize with everybody who's been affected by this. And what ended up happening was that when I was so fully open to everybody's perspective on that, I actually had a really difficult, like mental breakdown. Like every night in the middle of the night, I would wake up with like existential dread, like panic attacks all the time. And I didn't even know how to get out of it.
Mm.
And so when I talk about like empathy, like this positive empathy being something where you go out and you're in your hot air balloon, right? You lift off the ground, you go into their experience, then you have to ground yourself back into your experience. I think that is something that people who are still developing in their empathy don't understand. And it's such an important component of it. And I had been studying empathy for a few years at that point. And empathy, the way I understood it at that point, was destroying my life.
Mm.
And so to come out of that and to be on the other side of that and now see that it's actually, there is a higher form of empathy, I think that that's really important when we're teaching people how to do it and how to define it, because I valued it and it ruined me. And so now I still value it. Obviously, I'm an empathy researcher and we're having these conversations. I still value it, but I value a different version of it than I did before, which
Yeah,
is,
it could be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh, it could be. That's the mutual empathy. In a sense, what we were doing was an empathy deficit because you weren't being heard and seen yourself. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Like your anxiety, it sounded like you had no place to kind of share that and be heard. So you were just taking in everybody's experience, but which was, empathizing in one direction, but it wasn't that mutuality. And there wasn't
Yeah.
a mutuality probably between the participants that were all affected listening to each other
Right.
either.
And well, they
Right?
weren't talking to each
Right.
other.
Uh-huh.
And so I felt like I had to go between, and I actually never had communication with the family of the wife because I didn't know her as well and I didn't know her family. But I was still like seeing what they were posting on social media and how hateful they were being. Obviously, I mean, I would feel the same way. And so I was feeling that from them, from the things they were saying. And I was feeling everything, my interpretation of what his family was experiencing, and also the trolls online, what they were saying, who didn't have any business being part of this conversation. I was taking all of that on as well, and I was destroying my own life through the process. And so when we're talking about like creating this training, I think that needs to be an important component of it, because people misunderstand what is healthy empathy, and they misunderstand why we even say it's a good thing in the first place. And so I think I've got to go, but I think that's like a parting thought, and we can continue
Yeah,
this next
great.
week.
Holistic
Very good.
empathy.
Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, see
Yeah,
you next
Thank
week.
you both.
thank you
And
for
think
sharing
about what
that.
we want to do too, kind of like specific steps that we can take too.
Yeah,
Projects,
and Edwin, I'm so sorry. Since the beginning of this endeavor, you keep wanting to get to that.
Uh-huh.
And we keep just having discussions. And so
It's
I'm
fun. I
sorry.
enjoy it too, but I wish that's all we had to do. But
I know, but I know the rubber needs to meet the road at
Uh-huh.
some point.
Yeah.
Right.
But,
We'll
Okay,
get
that's
there.
good.
I appreciate you sharing this. This is very meaningful. I think there's more to
Great
explore there.
story.
So
Okay.
next week we will actually start making like serious progress.
Yeah,
So
okay. At least get clear on what
this
progress we
has
want to
all
make.
been progress. This has all
Well, it's
been
all
good.
documented, right? We
Yes.
got the notebook LMs, got a whole podcast there.
Oh, I wonder what the podcast is going to say about today's conversation. It's going to be great.
All righty. Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.